Okay, so thank you everyone for being here in the Cosmic Sisterhood. And our guest speaker tonight is Annabel. So thank you, Annabel DeBoulay, for being here. I'm going to hand it over to you. As we've discussed, if you could sort of tell us about your incredible background. I read about it on your website, and it's just this, there's a book there. I'm sure you've already written books, but there's definitely more books about your life just there and sitting and waiting to be shared, because you've written fiction, haven't you?
Yeah.
Spiritual,
Yes.
based on your life. But anyway, let me hand it over to you, and you can tell us all about your journey and how this all began for you, and how you got to where you are now, and what it is you do, because this would be quite unusual perhaps for many of us. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice, and thank you for inviting me to be here tonight. And Alice, as she's just said, she specifically asked me to share a bit about my story and how it entwines with my own kind of spiritual path and path of soul development, because it's impossible to split them, really. So if I begin back when I was 19, and that was really the beginning of my kind of what I would say my more conscious path. And I began my English degree, and I was studying all the Greek myths for the first time. So that was sort of my introduction to the concept of goddess. And then at a similar time at university, my mother had cancer for the second time. And with my fear of losing her, I then turned to the Divine Mother. And in those days, I had the most divine Italian boyfriend, who was obviously Catholic. So we began going to church to pray for my mother. And I began to connect so deeply with Mother Mary. And I then was very blessed to spend 4 summers living with his family in a very rural village in southern Italy. And that was really my initiation onto the path of the Madonna and the Black Madonna, which I now specialize in. So Mama, for example, would cut the throat of the chicken and scatter its blood to the earth, but with a prayer to the Madonna. So at this very sort of tender age of 20, I became fascinated by this interplay between paganism and Catholicism, which is really what Gnosticism is, which is what I specialize in now. And so that was sort of my introduction in Italy. And then I went to Peru, and I lived in the house of a shaman for a year, and I was volunteering with orphans there, but also writing socio-political articles for the Lima Times and campaigning on all the social issues around domestic violence, etc. there. But that was my initiation onto my shamanic path. So I went on this incredible pilgrimage with him throughout Peru, and ended up in the Amazon doing an ayahuasca ceremony with one of the tribes. And this was in the days when it wasn't like a common popular thing to do. I think now everyone does it, but in those days it was actually a really rare experience. And he had lived with this tribe for a long time in his teens. But during that ceremony, I asked for water, and I was handed by mistake, although nothing ever happens by mistake, pure alcohol, which they use ceremonially. And the shaman would usually put it in his mouth and shoot it into the fire. But they handed it to me by mistake, and I took a massive glug and I burnt the whole of the inside of my throat on this alcohol. And when I returned to England, to London, for the next 3 years, I went back to the London School of Economics, and I was doing my master's and my PhD research, specifically looking at goddess paganism, shamanism, and then looking at feminist theology and Gnosticism, and seeing specifically how patriarchal religion manipulated and appropriated goddess pagan beliefs and myths and rituals. But during that time of studying, I also had my first real deep soul's descent into suicidal depression and self-medicating with alcohol. Now, I think that alcohol I was given in that ceremony was like my initiation into the descent of the soul, really. And so for the next 3 years, I journeyed very deeply with my own childhood abuse. And I was still very much on that journey when I discovered I was pregnant with my first child. And I was only 26. And when I gave birth to Sophia, I knew I needed to call her Sophia. I had studied Sophia, obviously, as a Gnostic goddess, but I had no real lived embodied experience of who Sophia is as the Black goddess of wisdom. But I did know that I needed to call my daughter Sophia. But Sophia was born with a life-threatening syndrome and multiple disabilities. And she had life-saving surgery at birth and then a further 12 operations over the next several years. And that really was my initiation by the goddess Sophia into her mythos, which my daughter and I came over those years to become really a living embodiment of. So with every surgery, she led us on that descent of the soul and then the rebirth back into the light of greater wisdom, of love, of compassion, of strength and courage. Now, this is a journey that each of us go on in our own unique ways. And this is, for me, how Sophia, the Black goddess of wisdom, weaves her magic through our lives if we let her. Because she is that light that we find in those shadow depths of all the challenges we face in life. And her light is also within us. So it's our own soul's light, our own soul gifts that we're bringing through in this lifetime. Some of which we are born with as our natural gifts and talents and passions as the divine magical child self. And then some of them are gifts that come like these lights, of wisdom from these experiences that we survive in our lifetime. And then obviously, if you believe in past lives, it's the wisdom that we're bringing from all our past life experiences as well. So during this 9-year period, I tend to, I'm sure you do as well, but I tend to cycle often in 9-year cycles. I wrote The Serpent's Tail, so I channeled all my work into the writing of The Serpent's Tail, which Alison mentions. So this is set in the village where I used to live in southern Italy, but it's set at the time of the witch burnings. And it is a very deep historical exploration of the Inquisition and the witch burnings. And it follows a village's fight to save their wise woman from the fires. But it's also a very allegorical novel. So it really explores this myth of Sophia and reclaims this role of priestess, specifically of Sophia. And then I went through a divorce from my my daughter's father, remarried my childhood sweetheart, relocated down to Glastonbury, where I had been coming by that point for 10 years, and I had done my Priestess of Avalon training. Sorry, is that one? Yeah. And relocated to Glastonbury. I just published my novel, went to the Glastonbury Goddess Conference, which I've now worked at for 20 years, I think now, and gave a talk about my novel and believed rather naively at that point that me and my children had been through all we were going to go through. I'd got Sophia through these 12 operations and to a level of stability. And it was as if I'd thrown a gauntlet to life or to Avalon, because the Isle of Avalon and Glastonbury is the Isle of the Dead, transformation and rebirth. And my experience of Avalon over these 21 years now of journeying here is that she is the cauldron of transformation, and she works her magic on you by repeatedly taking you on these descents of the soul, like Sophia, like the archetype of Sophia. And so I was 6 months pregnant with my son, and then 3 months later I gave birth to him, and he was born with an even more severe life-threatening syndrome. So he was born with a paralyzed face and throat, unable to speak, breathe, feed, or smile. So we spent many years living on that bridge between life and death here, actually literally in the next door village to here. And would walk this land here that's about 20 minutes outside of Glastonbury, very close to Borough Mump, which is the next sacred mound, where the Michael Ley line flows through the Tor and then it flows to Borough Mump. So we live on this land here. And I was taken to an even deeper place. I don't think I could ever have imagined going to the place I had to go to, because I was trained by intensive care nurses, and I had to resuscitate my son several times a day under emergency conditions for months. So it was an incredibly intense experience. And for that first year, I was just running on adrenaline to keep him alive. But once his airway stabilized somewhat, I went to a depth of rage and lots of compassion that I could never have imagined. So I had been working for the mental health charity Mind for 6 years. I'd been coming from this place of deep compassion and working with very, very vulnerable members of society, you know, suffering from severe and enduring mental health issues. And I got to a place in me where I couldn't feel compassion. I was in such a deep place of rage against life, against Goddess. I swore I'd never be her priestess again. I couldn't believe that she would do it to me again, that she would make my children suffer again. And anyway, I began to paint my art installation called The Healing Womb. And it was a 9-month birthing process. It was a 9-month pregnancy, really, gestation. And I painted these vast, 4 vast paintings of Mother of Loss, Hecate, Mother of Solitude, Lilith, Mother of Healing, Bridget, and Mother of Compassion, Kuan Yin. And during that 9 months, I literally painted my way through all my shadow emotions. So through the rage and the grief, then to those intense feelings of solitude that we feel when we're going through something really deeply traumatic. We can feel so alone in that place of trauma. And then through to Bridget, where I began to open to receiving the healing. And then finally, I was able to come back to a place of compassion. So from that point onwards, I was, journeying very deeply, continuing as a priestess and as a writer, as a workshop facilitator, until I eventually launched the what was known as the Glastonbury Gnostic Centre and Chapel, right in the heart of Glastonbury. If any of you know Glastonbury, it was situated in St Dunstan's House, which is the closest building to the Glastonbury Abbey, and Glastonbury Abbey is built upon those very, very old, ancient remains of the first chapel that was built there, reportedly by Joseph of Arimathea and his followers when they brought Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene and the Holy Grail, her child Sarah, to the Holy Isle of Avalon. So for 2 years, I had the centre and chapel there, devoted to Gnosticism, to the path of the Rose lineage. And this it's a weaving of the Avalon rose lineages, so the Celtic Druidic, the Avalonian, and the rose lineages that I specialize in. And then sadly, I had to close the premises last summer due to the pandemic. And like I'm sure so many of you, I ended up being in this place of stasis. It was like the hangman of the tarot, just literally hanging there for like a year. And obviously I continued working online, but I was really just waiting and waiting for Goddess to show me where the chapel needed to be and what I needed to ground and anchor and root. And it all flowed with the most incredible synchronicities, as I'm sure it always does in your life. But eventually, I was incredibly blessed to be able to buy this chapel on this isle within the Lake of Avalon, the Great Lake, and it sits within the Glastonbury zodiac dog. So there are 13 signs of the Glastonbury zodiac. 12 are in Glastonbury and surrounding villages. And then there is one 13th sign that's just set a bit outside, which is where I am, on one of the islands that was in the Great Lake, because it was an inland sea. And the dog, of course, is the guardian of the underworld, or in Celtic myth, it's the otherworld. And we literally sit below the dog star Sirius. So I truly believe that this chapel that I've been so blessed to become a guardian of now is a portal, A, to Sirius, and B, it feels like one of the gateways to Avalon. That I've been asked on that soul level to come and be a guardian to, and to share, you know, with the community, and to help guide people on their own path of gnosis, is what I like to call it. So I think for me, for example, I'm sure Alice has mentioned, you know, like I run a priestess training and practitioner training, but I see myself very much as a facilitator on other people's own path of gnosis. So it's just about creating sacred containers that enable people to journey with their own soul, their own deities, their own guides, and ultimately to recognize their own light within them, their own soul gifts, their soul contract as to why they have contracted to be here at this time, especially during this period of the deconstruction of the patriarchy and the co-creation of the new earth. And then to, you know, to act as that guide for people who are interested in the Rose lineage, in Avalon and in the Celtic Druidic path. So that's me in a nutshell.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Annabel. Can everyone hear me? I mean, just wow, what a hard, amazing, incredible story. And I literally don't know where to begin with questions. I've written some questions down, but it's just such a big, huge life that you've lived with all these incredible and difficult, I mean, so hard happenings within it. And then here you are sat in front of us, kind of glowing and so full of your wisdom. It's just incredible and amazing, and kind of a real affirmation of how we can all rise above and into our power and purpose. I guess my first question is, within all of that, at what point did you kind of become who you are now? I recognize obviously that you had a period without compassion, understandably, after all that you went through. And before that, it sounds like you were already on a spiritual, well, very much on a spiritual path. And then it kind of wiped away. And then it's almost like you've completely leveled up as a result of your children's disabilities and that horrendous year with your son. And how did you recognize that? At what point did it kind of really shift?
I think it was painting the healing womb art installation. And I was really, the thing I've always done is I've always sat in circle with women. I have always, like, when I was going through the years when my daughter was going through all those operations, I was doing my, ended up doing 4 years of the priestess training down here. And so Avalon and Glastonbury became my sanctuary, and I would come away every 6 or 8 weeks, sit in circle with sisters, cry, process, walk the land, be in ritual, be in ceremony, be in prayer. And I would go back completely revitalized and with the strength to go back and nurse my daughter. And I think I went through a similar process after my son, is that I was very blessed to be quite soon after, during that period really, where I'd really lost my compassion and was feeling a huge amount of rage and injustice. I was actually also in an 18-month shamanic women's journey. And that was so incredibly powerful for me, because I was able to work so deeply with fire, for example, and in ritual and in ceremony, and again, out on the land and with my sisters. And that has always been a fundamental way in which I process what I'm going through and what I'm coping with. And I don't think I would be who I am now if I hadn't have had that in my life. And of course, that is what keeps me grounded in my truth and in my devotion to the divine, to the deities, to Goddess, to the earth, you know, is that constant processing, even if I'm feeling, even if I'm raging at Goddess, for example, at least if I'm still working elementally and on the land, I'm actually still I'm still engaging with her, and I'm allowing her to hold me, really. It's a bit like, you know, a child kind of tantruming at their mother, but actually the mother just needs to keep holding the child while they tantrum and create that safe container. And that, for me, is what the Goddess does for us, you know, or whoever, you know. I believe very much in the divine feminine and masculine, but it's whatever resonates with you, however you call the divine, or but yes, just feeling that constant sense of them there, and of them being able to take whatever you throw at them.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much just within that. The idea of women's circles, obviously we're sat in one now, and I mean, I found that deeply, you know, helpful to life in the past few years. I've been sitting in women's circles, and back when I was on my early spiritual path when I was a teenager, you know, I was sat in my dad's goddess circles and spiritual circles and things, you know, and it's such an interesting and profound place to be, and particularly with other women. I was going to ask you as well about, you mentioned that you found the Goddess when your mother had a second bout of cancer. So do you find that many women, because obviously I know you work with women and it's a big part of your life, do you find that many women have, without wanting to sound glib, sort of mother issues, and that's how they end up, or perhaps is the catalyst to finding the Goddess?
Yeah, I think a lot of women who come onto this path have suffered some trauma around either the mother, or in reaction against patriarchy and the father. And I don't mean biological father, I mean, you know, the patriarch. So I think a lot of women who are drawn to this path, for example, I mean, quite a high percentage have suffered abuse, or some form of abuse, or neglect, or trauma, or perhaps have not had the experience of good mothering, or have lost their mother. But I think often there's a trigger there that acts as a catalyst for someone to be really deeply drawn to the Divine Mother. I mean, obviously, a lot of people who are Catholic, where Mother Mary is very, very present in a way that she's not in Protestantism, you know, already had that deep connection, just due to their spiritual path. But I think when you're talking about women who, for example, might choose to leave a religious path that they were brought up in, and actually choose a pagan path and choose to explore the path of the Goddess, then often there is something that definitely triggers that and acts as a catalyst for it.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking the two things, the mother or the patriarchy, I think, just thinking of my own experience, that sometimes it's the patriarchy and the mother that has, even when the mother perhaps doesn't recognize it's there, is, and within ourselves too as a result. And then it's a kind of process of getting that out and finding what's in its place, what is left when everything we've ever known has been removed. And then, you've found this beautiful connection to these goddesses and these lineages. And I'll ask you one more question, because I'm sure other people would like to ask some questions before you lead us in a little journey. How would you recommend for the people listening to connect with their deity, their goddess, their spirituality, like on a daily basis?
So I think one of the most important things to do, if you can, is to walk the land daily. That for me, I have 3 dogs, so I'm forced to get out on the land every day, and that is absolutely imperative. It's one of the most powerful ways in which to connect with Mother Earth, with your guides, with your soul, because in the actual act of just walking, our left brain shuts down and our right brain opens up for synchronicities, for thoughts to come in. And that's definitely one of the most powerful ways. Meditation, prayer, journaling, and I think the most important thing is creative expression. So it's creating time on a weekly basis. If you can't do it on a daily basis, that's fine, because I know we all lead incredibly busy lives. But if you can commit to creating space in your weekly, calendar for creative expression, that is another key aspect, because your guides and your soul and the deities will come through as you're expressing. It's a co-creation with them, so yeah, those would be my main things, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would wholeheartedly agree with all of those. Since having a dog, I'm sure my spirituality has heightened being in those fields every day. Not to mention, I'm in the creative stuff, absolutely. So I'm going to open the floor to other people to ask some questions. So I'm just going to change my view so I can see. And if people could, if they want to ask a question, if you could raise your hand, which I think you can do, there's a little reaction button down the bottom. And if you raise your hand, then so make it nice and organized. So anyone got any questions for Annabel?
Don't be shy.
Oh, they're not. They may take a minute, but they're not shy. Sharon.
Hi. Yeah, hi, Annabel.
Hi, Sharon.
I don't know what Gnosticism is, and I just wondered if you could explain a little bit, just briefly, what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I use the term is the true teachings of the early Christian Gnostics before the 4th century AD, when they were manipulated and appropriated and had a patriarchal spin put on them. So I work with the Gnostic Bible and those original Gnostic teachings. So for example, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And if we go back to those original true teachings, we then see that they are actually founded on this very ancient sort of 5,000-year rose lineage that goes all the way back to ancient Sumeria. So that's what I specialize in. I historically and culturally and mythically trace the rose lineage from its beginnings. Actually, originally in Britain and Western Europe, in the megalithic cultures here, but then from ancient Sumeria, that was the cradle of civilization, because it was actually the first culture that wrote these stories down. And then you can trace these myths all the way down through ancient Judaism, ancient Egypt, the ancient Greco-Romano pantheon, until it arrives with the early Christian Gnostics. And so for me, Gnosticism is about those core teachings that are the bridge really between paganism and Christianity. So they're at that sort of origin point of Christianity. And Gnosticism per se is there are a lot of Gnostic myths, for example, the myth of Sophia, where she descends to earth and then has to be rescued by her bridegroom brother, Christ. And so that is really just a later adaptation of the myth of the descent of the soul that we see in Inanna Ishtar in ancient Sumeria and Babylonia, and that itself is founded on the cycle of Venus, the planet Venus.
Thank you.
You're welcome, love.
Okay, anyone else? Annie, did you, you've unmuted, I didn't know if you had a question.
Oh, no, sorry, I didn't mean to unmute. I'm just fascinated to listen in, and I'm sorry that I was late, is all I wanted to say. Yeah, I was very late today, and I've had to eat my dinner whilst listening, so sorry if you saw me stuffing my dinner in.
Any questions while we have you unmuted?
Sorry?
Any questions while we have you unmuted, or thoughts?
I think so I caught the second half of what you were discussing, and I think it is just really interesting to hear the bit that really struck a chord for me was about the compassion fatigue that you talked about. And I think Michelle, who's here as well this evening, works in bereavement services, as I do. And if you work in a sort of person-centered way in a kind of therapeutic or supportive setting, that kind of compassion fatigue that you described is my biggest fear. So hearing you talk about that was really powerful. And the fact that you're able to reach a point where you recognize that in yourself, and then were able to move through that. And what I would like to know is how, when you recognized that you were in this place of fatigue, did you regenerate and were able to reconnect to your compassion again when you felt that way?
Thank you so much, love. And it's so important that you've raised this, because I really hear that. Like, I was really experiencing that working for Mind anyway before my son was born. So I think I was kind of getting burnout from working in that field anyway, and then everything happened with Zach. So I think it was the process of painting the healing wound, because I was working so deeply. What I find is whenever you work with an archetype or with a goddess or a deity, their mythos or their archetypal energy begins to play out in your life. And so they kind of lead you on the journey. It's almost really beyond your control, because you're working at such a deep unconscious level with your psyche. And so as I painted these goddesses, they were on a very deep unconscious level, really helping me to process all those shadow emotions that were coming up. And then I was obviously attending this incredible women's shamanic circles over this whole time as well, and working very deeply with fire. And I mean, I certainly now I will still avoid being in company, for example, with women with completely healthy, non-disabled children, if they are in a drama around something, because I just have such a different reference point to what is stress. Like I don't.
It's a how deep is the mud thing, isn't it? Depends who you ask, or how.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, and at first I used to beat myself up for that, because I used to be like, oh, everything's relative and I should just be able to be fully compassionate to everyone. And then I had to, journey with that part of me that is a human being, And actually that's impossible. I was setting myself up for failure, really.
Yeah.
And just to accepting myself that with that aspect, my life experience with my children has been so extreme, that it's okay that part of me doesn't find it hugely comfortable spending a lot of time, with a young mother making a drama over her child having a cold, for example, and that's okay,
It's about finding your tribe, isn't it? It's about finding the people that you can surround yourself with, who you have those shared experiences with, who really get where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's it's one of the hardest things, like and I'm sure everyone can resonate with this in some way, is that feeling of intense isolation when you go through something deeply traumatic. Because like with a loss of a parent, even though the majority of people go through that experience in life, your experience is completely unique to you. And there's a sense of isolation within that trauma and that loss. So when I was painting Lilith and working with that aspect of solitude, that was incredibly powerful to just really go into that place and then find my allies. So I think that was another part of my path in really realizing how supportive my deities and my guides are to me. Like, I spend a huge amount of time on my own. I'm a single mother anyway, and I'm a creatrix, so I need to create on my own. So I do spend a huge amount of time on my own, and but I never feel alone, because I'm constantly, I feel constantly surrounded and held and supported by the divine and by my guides and by
So I think that's a big question. Yeah, that's a really big question that you've raised, which is one of the key ways that you cope with those challenges is to identify, not just your kind of earthly tribe, your spiritual tribe. The people that fit the entities or the deities, as well as the humans that you feel are your tribe. And I think probably, I can't speak for anyone else, but I think as a group of women, we're all here from very different experiences and very different points in our path of self-reflection or global or spiritual reflection, wherever we've come from. And I think one of the things for me is figuring out where I've come from, what the paradigm was that I was raised within, to the one that I'm researching and discovering myself. And you can scatter yourself so widely in trying to find a path, can't you? I think to hear you talk about finding the things that you resonate with and actually really going deep diving into those places and those paths and those stories. I think the big thing is stories, isn't it? It's the history of places, people and things, and finding the thing that really resonates with you. And that's something I'll take away from what you said, is the power that can be found in finding your tribe spiritually as well as kind of on an earthly plane.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, love. Thank you so much.
Annabel, do we obviously I've asked you to lead us in like a little meditation. Do we have time for any more questions, or should we begin that now?
What's the time now, Dane?
It's 2:45, yeah.
That's fine. I can do it as it is. It's an hour, isn't it? I can do a little speedy one.
Yeah.
If anyone did have another question.
Yeah, anyone else got another question? Because I'm sure some of you might. I'm looking at Michelle, actually. Michelle, do you have a question?
This is just beautiful, this session. Annabel, wow, what a divine being that you are, as well as everyone else in this room. I'm feeling very emotional, actually. It's the anniversary of my grandmother's death. She died at 101 this time last year, and it's the birthday of my mother, who died 11 years ago. So it's a big one. So there's so much in everything I'm receiving, and I'm just in awe of just all of you, and Annabel particularly. Your story is just incredible. So thank you, all of you. Something that one of you was speaking of was just that being in the hands of mother. I feel like I've got a drawing. I'm always writing. It's my creative outlet, but I've got a picture of a bowl there, and I feel like I'm being held by all of you today, and it's a very significant day, and bless you all. I'm going to stop speaking actually, but the question, actually I did have a question, Annabel. Where can we find out more about Gnosticism, or Gnostis, however you pronounce it? I'm fascinated. I come from, my grandfather was a Baptist minister. My grandmother was very much the Baptist minister's wife. So with that there and really exploring, I became very close with my grandmother. Her presence is very, very strong here today, I can tell you. That's exploring that. And then I got a message from when my mum was ill in hospital 11 years ago. She was in an Anglican hospital. I did not know who Isis was or anything like that, but I kept seeing this statue in the gift shop in the hospital. Every time I walk past it, and it just got my attention. I was like, who and what is that? But we go off to visit my mum up in palliative care, and this kept going on, and it wasn't until afterwards, and I thought, I need to go and buy that statue, and it was gone. And this is years later, I then started exploring what was that statue and Googling it, and that's where my whole spiritual path unfolded. So that was really long, but please, I'm to sort of maybe look at somewhere in between all of that. And the Gnosticism sounds very interesting. Maybe I feel like I'm drawn to explore it. Thank you. Sorry, and thank you for listening, everyone. I know that was all just blah.
Don't apologise. That was amazing. Thank you so much. Just deeply witnessing and honouring everything that you just shared with us, Michelle, and really honouring the souls of your mother and grandmother on this day especially. Thank you. Thank you, sister. So with Gnosticism, you can start with the Gnostic Bible. So it's really all the Nag Hammadi libraries, so the NHL library of Gnostic texts that were found and discovered in the desert. And so the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and then the Gnostic Bible is brilliant. That has every single bit of writing. And then there are so many books. If you go on my Instagram, on the bio, on Linktree, there is a link to you don't have to buy it through mine, but there is a link to my Amazon bookstore, and that has a lot of the books that I've used over the years, especially my master's and PhD, which will give you an idea. You can just have a look at those. But I would start with, there is so much being written now. I mean, when I was studying this, I began 30 years ago. Really, we were just reliant on the very authoritative teachers on this, who really are, incredible. So books like The Woman with the Alabaster Jar are absolutely fundamental. They're kind of like the Bibles of this. My absolute, one of my absolute Bibles is The Myth of the Goddess by Anne Baring and Jules Cashford. It's a pretty heavy academic tome, but it's absolutely brilliant. And that will take you through the whole thing. That's just not just Gnosticism. But yeah, I would just say have a look at that, and just be guided, be open to to guidance to which book. I hope that helps.
Fabulous.
Thank you. That's brilliant. I've got a nice long list there. I'm actually going away with my aunties, my mum's sisters, her twin sister, and my other auntie next week. So I'll have some nice light reading to explore.
Fantastic.
Surrounded by the Baptist ministers' daughters, which they just laugh about. So it's a blessing. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
That's wonderful, because this chapel that I bought, that is now the Avalon Rose Chapel, but it was originally a Baptist chapel, and I have the gravestones in the garden of the original vicar and his wife and daughters.
Amazing.
So yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
That's magic.
I just
Thank
want to show you the card. I drew that card this morning, answered prayer, before I came on. So, thank you.
Beautiful. Looks like Archangel Michael, doesn't it?
There you go, Annabelle. You're our answered prayer today. That's beautiful. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Let's let Annabelle whiz us through a quick little magical journey, if that's okay. We only have just 10 minutes, I think.
Okay, so Alice, where would you like me to take you all?
Where would you, can we do something with Sophia?
Oh.
Do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Speedy. We'll drop in fast. I won't do my usual really long calling in. Okay. Okay, so just inviting you to close your eyes. And just placing a hand over your heart. Starting to take a deep breath in through your nose, down to your belly and out through your mouth. Just releasing all that's come before this moment. Giving thanks to your soul for contracting to be here, to the soul of all your sisters who are on this journey with you. Calling to all the deities and guides, to your ancestors, and just finding yourself standing at the edge of an ancient forest and just beginning to walk down the path that winds its way through these ancient trees. And with every breath, just sinking deeper and deeper into that forest of your soul, until you eventually reach a sacred grove in the center of this forest. And there, the soul of a priestess from long, long ago is waiting for you. And just noticing who this priestess is, what she looks like. She may give you her name. She may tell you what lineage, what path she's a priestess of. This might be an aspect of you, of your soul from a past lifetime, or a soul sister. And just allowing her to lead you now towards a door that's carved out of a vast ancient trunk. And stepping now through that gateway into the corridor. Walking down that corridor deeper and deeper into this ancient tree of life until you come to the inner gateway. And this is the ancient cave of the Black Goddess of Sophia, she of 10,000 names. A lioness guards the gateway. And then when you're ready, you step through this inner sanctum and find yourself within the cave of Sophia, Black Goddess of Wisdom. And just seeing her now seated on a throne in the center of the cave, her fire burning brightly in front of her, as she invites you to come and sit across from her in front of the fire. And firstly, she asks you if there is anything you would like to release to the fire this night. Something that's potentially no longer serving you, some shadow thought or behavior that is no longer serving you. So for the next couple of minutes, just staring into the flames of that fire and just observing what it is that you release into those flames for transformation and rebirth. And just noticing as you release those things into the flames, observing what symbols they transform into. Now gazing upwards at Sophia, the Black Goddess of Wisdom. And for the next couple of minutes of silence, just receiving her guidance for you at this time in your life. And then Sophia gives you a gift to symbolize this guidance that she's given you. And then when you're ready, just giving thanks to Sophia, to the fire, and just allowing your priestess sister to guide you back out of the cave, finding yourself once more in the center of that sacred forest of your soul, saying farewell to the souls of your sisters, starting to take a deep breath in, coming back fully into your body, into this present moment, taking another deep breath in, stretching out your arms, your fingers, becoming aware of the ground, the chair beneath you. Taking another deep breath in. And then when you're ready, just gently opening your eyes.
Thank you, Annabel. I cannot believe that you did that in 9 minutes. That felt like it went on for a lot longer. That was lovely.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute blessing to be in circle with you all. Thank you so much. And much love to you all from Avalon.
Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been a very special evening, and thank you for sharing your incredible story and wisdom with us.
Thank you, love. Thank you so much, Alice.
Okay. All right, then, everyone. We'll say good night, and I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Night.
Bye.